Hey, welcome to Quick Take. I'm Susie and I'm here with James. How are you, James?
Hi, Susie. I am fantastic. Although it's a little warm here in the room, so I'm gonna have to call the makeup people in to get powder my forehead.
Get them
Um,
back. Get them back.
oh, they're right here. They sneak in when you really take the audience or attention. They come in and they powder me up.
Oh,
So
I thought you
uh,
were going to say, I better make this interesting or you're going to take a snooze on me.
no, it's always interesting with you. You keep me on my toes.
Nice, 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 nice. All right. So that teased me up well to tell you I was working with an executive this week and we were talking about his strategy for next year. And he leads a call center and sales people that are connected. And he was like, he wanted to put in place this new idea of onboarding people and putting them in this work group so they can learn the skills from one another
Mhm.
before they move on. It doesn't really matter. But he was like, but what if it doesn't work? And
Mm.
what if I start it and then how will it look? How will it make me look if it doesn't do well? And what if it, and so like he had all this self doubt about it. I was so fascinated by it because to him, like I was like, oh, that's a great idea. But then it was like just riddled with all of this worry on taking risks. And I
Yeah,
thought, I
yeah,
wonder if this is common.
yeah. I think risk taking and an executive's ability to make decisions that have risk is really interesting because I think it's a muscle that so many leaders build up over time. And really good leaders don't know that they do it. And so
Yeah.
it is really difficult to articulate or teach somebody how to behave during risky situations. You can imagine somebody whose house is flooding for the first time, how challenging the decision making process is during that difficult
Yeah.
time versus somebody who's been through 30 floods, right? I would suspect the challenges of your parents raising all 27 of your siblings was pretty simple by the time they got to you because there was nothing they haven't seen.
That's so interesting to think about it like that because as a leader, it's so easy to jump in for that very exact reason.
Mhm.
Like, this is what you do. This is how you do it. Do this first. Put the towels down over here. Don't waste time doing it over here. And it feels like you're so efficient in that moment. So anyway, I know it's a different topic, but I
No,
was
but
like,
it's
that
very
is
much
so
the same thing.
true.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
It's
very
so
much the same
true
thing.
to letting it go. And it reminds me of my sister has a big job. And I remember one of the things she said was, it is true that it's lonely on top. It's lonely being up there because
So
sometimes
true.
you do have to make a decision
Mhm.
that is, if you feel very isolated, like you really can't ask a lot of people. And so it's kind of up to you and you see it clearly as your decision. And so I'm sure that that adds to the complexity of being a risk taker.
Oh, sure. And I think that, my first piece of advice or my first recommendation in this space is kind of stupid because it doesn't make a lot of sense. And a lot of our listeners will understand it. But if you don't get what I'm saying, you've already done it because it's really developing a risk assessment framework to evaluate the potential opportunities and outcomes. And good leaders have built that framework over 10 years. And
Yeah.
that assessment is done in a lightning fast,
Yeah.
right? And they think about it, the pros and the cons and the short-term issues, the long-term issues, the impact to budget, the impact to morale, the impact to the stock price. And while some of those take due diligence and some heavy thought, certainly acquiring another company, firing a board member, those things are not quite as flippant. But sometimes, an executive needs to make a quick decision. And those are done within that framework that you build over time. So, if you're a listener who is a more junior leader and
Yeah.
you're confused or impressed by the ability of a leader to make decisions, understand that they have built a framework. You know, when I was in college, there was a guy who I think he's probably still in college. He certainly smoked enough weed to stay there, but he always joked about the Ben Franklin method. And so we would literally be deciding what bar to go to, and he would whip out the Ben Franklin method. And
Interesting.
and the Ben Franklin method is basically you whip out a piece of paper and you put the pros and the cons on both sides of a T chart, and you write them all down, and then you discuss it. It's very
Yeah, that's
rudimentary,
was his front
but
row.
but you know what? It was still a risk assessment framework.
Yeah.
And every framework that anybody uses, whether it's conscious or subconscious, is not too different than that. They're getting all the data they can possibly get, and then they're assessing it. But the Ben Franklin method is still a framework that you can take advantage of. And ultimately, as an executive, you take that, you build something bigger and better. And so you have your own framework. That frame, everybody has their own framework. But, again, if you're a more junior leader, it's really about finding ways for you to evaluate the situation, look at pieces of the data and try to make decisions.
Yeah, and I guess to make that point again, it's like just find a framework that works for you. And when you're saying over time, when you say it becomes invisible or you're just unable to do it, it's that framework plus this experience that leads you
Sure.
to this just ability to react
Right.
in every scenario.
Yeah. And I think the reality is this is a science, right? This is less, I
Hmm.
mean, there is art to it, but I mean, Amazon has a risk assessment model training course.
Yep.
They
Yep.
teach it, right? Microsoft has a very specific risk analysis framework that they use. And so those frameworks exist. Obviously, like anything else you can learn in a class, you want to customize it for yourself. But don't think that this is something that is beyond your ability to learn and is
Yeah.
something that is not outside of your grasp to start to understand.
And I think the other piece is you take a framework and you try it and then you make it your
Hmm.
own and don't feel intimidated by, I don't
Yeah.
have enough knowledge to know what to do with this. Just
Hmm.
try it
No,
because
I
it
think that's
is
right.
more of an art and not a
Yep.
science.
Yep. And then I think that's a perfect segue to my
Thank you.
second piece of advice,
You're
as
welcome.
always, because you're such a great podcast host, is that really, create a fail fast environment, right? So you are evolving, learning that framework, but you want to create an environment in your organization where you determine that you are not going in the right direction and you allow yourself to fail quickly and move on. You know, so often I find when I coach either individuals or companies, I really think that my job is to help them learn to fail fast so they can get out of the problem that they're in and move on to another one, address the situation. You want them to get to the solution that's going to matter and not get caught up in trying to get stuck with this problem that they're dealing with.
Let's break that down a little bit because that is such a catchphrase, fail
Hmm.
fast. And what if it's the leader's idea and the leader is like all gung ho to make it work and I see that it's not going to work? Does that mean
Sure.
raise my hand and say it or is it up to the leader to make that space? Like what is that look like? What should that look like?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that you create um, a a framework, again, a methodology, so you have rapid experimentation. So you can't just out of the chute go, "Hey, this idea is bad, boss. Let's fail fast." I mean, that's too late,
Yeah.
right? That's just, you
Yes.
just don't throw the sticky on it and hope it works. But what you can do is encourage people to have ideas and and metrics around a problem, so you can determine quickly if you're going in the right direction. And so, I know that I've worked with leaders who tend to have grand ideas, who tend to bring them to the table as if they're well vetted, who have these, they'll get influenced by the in-flight magazine or, something they heard on the radio on the way into the
Yeah.
office. And a good way to counter that is to put key metrics associated with that project that you can measure very quickly. You're doomed when every project's first key metric is, in fourth quarter or 3 quarters from now. So, if somebody comes to the table with a problem or a solution, maybe, an executive who you can't ignore, say, that's great. Let's put together 3 metrics that we can measure in 3 weeks to determine if we're really making progress. That's a
Yeah.
fail fast culture. That's a fail fast environment that allows you to make decisions and look at those problems in a different way.
That's exactly right. And I guess I wanted you suggested this. I'm hoping this isn't your third tip, but you suggested this before around what is the worst case scenario? And maybe even taking like a few minutes while you're going through it to even anticipate what could go wrong so that if it starts going that way, you're already kind of thinking that this wouldn't be the
Sure.
best solution.
Well, I
So,
think that's part of your framework, really, is evaluating
yeah,
possible
fair.
outcomes, preparing yourself for those outcomes. When what's the worst could happen? Our employees could die in the data center. Well, maybe that risk is a little more, maybe your risk appetite isn't appropriate. But, if you do think through those things, you do look at worst case scenario. One of the things that I really enjoy, I'll go back to my framework briefly, and I talk about this a lot, and I'll give a shout out to a former coworker of ours at Comcast, Alan Oatman, who I thought was always a great leader. He always appreciated the fact that he was the pessimistic voice in the
Yeah.
room. And I
Yep.
found it was so important. So many of us technology people are always optimists. And Alan taught me that it's important not to have a negative Nancy. And Alan was not a negative Nancy, but to say, hey, let me look at it from what if it fails?
Yeah.
And it is so important that your framework looks at those failure scenarios just as much as us technology people look at the success scenarios.
Yeah. And even looking at what that path may look like so you can see
Hmm.
it before it happens. All
Yep,
right.
yep,
So what's
yep.
your last one?
Well, my third one is really, we'll call it the Alan Oatman suggestion, which is surround
Nice.
yourself with good people and make sure that you
Yeah.
have diversity in thought, diversity in points of view. If you have a framework that makes sense and you're helping yourself or helping your organization put a fail fast, rapid prototyping
Yeah.
methodology in place, it's so key to have people around you that are not thinking, helping you stay out of the bubble, thinking about things differently, as Alan often did. Let's talk about what happens when this fails. What does that look like? And I think it's so important that you make sure that you're not surrounded by people who think exactly like you.
I think another key to that is recognizing when people are like that, not to shut them down because it's
Oh, yeah.
so
Oh, so
easy.
easy to do. Yeah. And I would say that's the thing that I really learned early in my career working with Alan as an early young executive. I did feel like he was always just trying to make it harder. But when we talked about it, he's like, no, you guys are saying that this is what happens if it goes well. Somebody has to say the other.
Yeah,
Right. And it
exactly.
wasn't a matter of him trying to stop us. It was him trying to show us the alternative. And I think that,
Mhm,
that is the benefit of a cross functional team. That is the benefit of a diverse organization.
mhm.
DEI gets a bad rap right now, but the diversity in thought cannot be
Absolutely.
undervalued. And I
Yeah.
think if you're surrounded with people that think just like you, we'll
Yep.
ignore all the other attributes. But if everybody thinks like you, you're not going to move the company forward.
Yeah. And be a good steward of that. Make sure you're
Absolutely.
watching yourself.
Hmm.
It's one thing to bring that to the table. It's another thing to really encourage those
Oh, to
voices
foster it.
to
Right.
be
Right.
courageous. Cause
Hmm.
I've brought ideas and I've brought up things and then there's silence. And that
Hmm.
even silence
Oh,
makes
it's
me
worse.
apprehensive
Yes.
again. Cause I'm like, ooh, that was dumb. Cause then I put in the silence the judgment that I believe is in their head. It may not even
Yeah,
have been that bad. So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
being self-regulating, I think, for leaders,
Mhm.
we forget that to be a good observer of ourselves.
Yep, yep. If you're gonna surround yourself with a diversity of thought, you have to foster that thought. You have to
Yep.
encourage it. You have to create a space for people to speak. Absolutely mission critical.
All right. So what are your 3?
First, build a framework, learn a framework, research frameworks. But as a leader, you need to have a framework in which you can effectively evaluate a risk situation and make a decision. Secondly, you want to build an environment in which you can take risks and really fail quickly. Determine that that risk was worth the risk or not worth the risk, and your investments in time, money, and resources can be less if you can fail fast. And third, surround yourself with people that think about things differently. That diversity in thought helps you see further down the line, helps you think about the risky situation better, and it certainly allows you to take more risks because you're looking at them more clearly.
I think it's really great. It made me think as you were going to, it's okay to go, okay, why am I being apprehensive? This is a risk. Like even identifying
Absolutely.
how this feels and why you feel apprehensive. Ah, such good. So embrace risk and fail fast.